Close your eyes for a moment and picture the world we call the Middle Ages. Perhaps you see castles rising gently on the horizon, the flicker of torches along stone walls, or villagers moving quietly through narrow streets. We often imagine this time as distant, shadowy, even strange. But tonight, let's take a slower walk through those centuries and listen more carefully. You may discover that many of the stories we've been told are, for generations, people have painted the medieval world as dark and dirty, filled with superstition and fear. Yet history often whispers a softer truth. Medieval men and women bathed in warm bathhouses. They cared for their homes and bodies, and they found moments of joy even in uncertain times. The Iron Maiden, that terrifying cage of spikes we see in museums, was never part of their daily lives. It was a later invention, Maya. If you let your imagination drift, you might find yourself in Strasbourg in the year 1518, where townsfolk began to dance endlessly in the streets, their steps both mysterious and sorrowful. Or perhaps you hear the chant of monks as they guide a strange trial where even an animal, a pig, might be judged before a crowd. These stories may sound unusual, but beneath them lie simple truths. People trying to find meaning, people longing for order in a world that of. The myths of the Middle Ages are not just curiosities to smile at before sleep. They are gentle reminders that human beings, across every age, seek the same things: comfort, purpose, and connection. And when we look past tea. So, as you rest and listen, allow yourself to travel back through time. Walk softly beside the knights, the villagers, the storytellers of old. Feel the quiet hum of their lives, not so different from our own. And as the stories unfold, let them carry you calmly and steadily into a deeper sense of wonder and perhaps into dreams. Myth 1. The Flat Earth. Close your eyes and let us return to a time long before maps were printed in every book, long before photographs of our planet were sent down from space. Imagine yourself in the Middle Ages. You are a traveler, perhaps a merchant or a monk, standing at the edge of the sea. The waves stretch endlessly before you, and the horizon melts softly into the sky. It might seem, at first glance, that the world is flat, that if you sailed too far, you might fall into the unknown. This is a picture many of us were given in school. The medieval world, they told us, believed the earth was a flat disk, and only daring explorers proved otherwise. It is a story often repeated, perhaps because it feels simple and dramatic, but like many myths, the truth is gentler and far more interesting. Globe showing Europe, Africa, what medieval minds really knew. In reality, most educated people of the Middle Ages did not believe the earth was flat. As early as the 6th century BCE, Greek thinkers such as Pythagoras and later Aristotle had already suggested that the earth was round. Aristotle even noticed how the shadow of the earth on the moon, during an eclipse, curved gracefully. This idea traveled forward through time, carried in manuscripts, whispered in universities, and taught in monasteries. By the early medieval period, scholars across Europe accepted that the earth was a sphere. Monks studying the heavens, sailors watching the slow disappearance of ships over the horizon, and travelers who saw new stars rise as they moved south. All these clues reinforced the same conclusion. The round earth was not a shocking discovery, but a quiet truth known for centuries. So where did the flat earth idea come from? It turns out, this was a story shaped much later, in the 19th century, when writers wanted to paint the Middle Ages as an age of ignorance, waiting to be rescued by the brilliance of modern science. The myth of a flat medieval earth was less about history and more about contrast, a way of making the present look brighter by casting the past in shadow. Milky Way, why the myth persisted. Perhaps the myth persisted because it was simple to picture. Children in classrooms could easily imagine medieval sailors trembling at the thought of tumbling over an edge. The story fit neatly into a larger tale of progress. First, humans thought the world was flat. Then Columbus bravely sailed, and only then did knowledge triumph. But real history is rarely so neat. Columbus, when he set sail westward in 1492, did not fear falling off the earth. His debate with scholars was not about whether the world was round, but about its size. He believed Asia could be reached more quickly by sailing west. Many of his critics simply thought he had miscalculated the distance, and as it turned out, they were right. crescent moon a gentle perspective. When we look at the myth of the flat earth, what we really see is a lesson about how stories are told. Myths often survive not because they are accurate, but because they are easy, memorable, and dramatic. They provide a clear contrast between then and now, even if the line is not so sharp in truth. In a way, the flat earth myth is less about the Middle Ages and more about us. It reveals our human desire for simple explanations, for tidy tales where knowledge moves in a straight line from darkness to light. Yet history, like the horizon, curves gently. It bends and folds, carrying wisdom forward in quiet ways, even when the surface appears flat. Water wave lessons across time. The real medieval world was not one of flat maps and fearful sailors. It was a world of curiosity, of scholars copying ancient texts by candlelight, of navigators reading the stars, of poets imagining the cosmos as a grand, spherical harmony. So, as you rest and listen, perhaps you can let go of the image of people huddled on a flat disk. Instead, picture them as they were, gazing upward at the sky, wondering, dreaming, and already knowing that the earth beneath their feet was round. And maybe the lesson is this: myths are not mistakes to be ashamed of, but mirrors showing us what people, in different times, wanted to believe. The flat earth myth reminds us to look closer, to soften our judgments of the past, and to see that knowledge often flows more smoothly, more quietly, than the stories we are told. Sparkles a soft whisper to end. So tonight, as the horizon outside your window melts into the night sky, you might think of those who stood centuries ago on distant shores. They too watched the horizon, wondering what lay beyond. They did not fear an edge of the world. They dreamed of lands unseen, and their dreams carried them forward. And perhaps, as you close your eyes, you can feel that same horizon within you, curving gently, endless, inviting you to journey on, not in fear, but in quiet wonder. Myth 2, the Iron Maiden. Imagine, if you will, stepping softly into a dimly lit museum. Before you stands a tall, dark figure, its body shaped like a coffin, its surface carved with serene, almost holy face. The doors stand open just enough to reveal what waits inside, rows of sharp iron spikes, gleaming coldly. It is called the Iron Maiden, and legend tells us that victims were placed inside, embraced by steel, pierced slowly until life faded away. For many years, this was the image passed down as truth. The Iron Maiden became a symbol of the Dark Ages, of cruelty and superstition, of punishments that seemed too monstrous to imagine. But here, as with the flat earth, the story whispered by history is much softer and stranger. Candle where the story began. The Iron Maiden, as we picture today, was not truly a medieval invention. There is no solid evidence that such a device was ever used in the Middle Ages. In fact, the first descriptions of an Iron Maiden appear centuries later, in the 18th and 19th centuries. Historians believe the myth was born when antiquarians and collectors in Europe began assembling objects from older times. They took coffins, old armor, and spiked devices used for other purposes, and combined them into one terrible contraption. The Iron Maiden, in truth, was more of a theatrical creation than a tool of justice. The most famous example stood in Nuremberg, Germany. In the late 1700s, it was displayed to curious visitors as a relic of medieval punishment. People would look upon it with horror, whispering about the cruelty of ancestors. But evidence shows it was likely cobbled together from mismatched parts. Its spikes, its body, its face, all belong to different centuries. Balance scale, the reality of medieval punishment. This is not to say the Middle Ages were gentle or free of suffering. Punishments could be harsh and prisons grim. Yet devices like the Iron Maiden belonged more to imagination than reality. The truth of medieval justice was often simpler. Executions by hanging, beheading, or burning. Fines for lesser crimes. Public shaming in stocks. These punishments were brutal enough without needing a spiked coffin. And unlike the Iron Maiden myth, they were consistent with the resources and practices of the time. So why then did people believe so strongly in the Iron Maiden? Milky Way, the power of fear and storytelling. Part of the answer lies in the way humans tell stories. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was looking back on the Middle Ages with both fascination and disdain. Writers and collectors want to portray the era as darker, bloodier, less enlightened than their own. The Iron Maiden became a perfect symbol, a visual proof of barbarity, whether real or not. In a way, the Iron Maiden was never about the Middle Ages. It was about the fears and imaginations of those who lived later, who shaped the past into a tale of cruelty to make their own time shine brighter by contrast. Crescent Moon, a gentle reflection. The myth of the Iron Maiden reminds us of how easily history can be shaped and reshaped by the hands of those who tell it. Sometimes objects are not what they seem. A coffin can be turned into a cage of spikes. A story told often enough can begin to feel like fact, even when no evidence lies behind it. And yet, there is something strangely human about this, too. The same imagination that built cathedrals and carved saints also built myths of terrible machines. Both reveal a desire to understand, to dramatize, to make sense of fear. Sparkles lessons beneath the iron. If we step closer, not in fear, but in curiosity, we see the Iron Maiden differently. It is not a window into medieval cruelty, but into the ways we tell stories about cruelty. It shows us how later generations wanted to believe in a darker past, to make their own world feel lighter, and it invites us to be gentle in our judgments. The Middle Ages, like every age, held both shadow and light. To imagine them only through a cage of spikes is to miss the warmth of their daily lives, the music, the markets, the prayers, the laughter. Milky Way, a soft whisper to end. So, the next time you picture the Iron Maiden, perhaps you can let its spikes soften into silence. Imagine it instead as a mirror, reflecting not the truth of medieval punishment, but the fears and fascinations of later centuries. As you drift towards sleep, remember that not all myths are lies. Some are simply stories that wandered too far, shaped more by imagination than by reality. The Iron Maiden is one such story, a reminder that even in history, what frightens us most is often born not of fact, but the tales we choose to tell. And with that thought, may you rest more easily, knowing that the past is not always as dark as the myth suggests, but often gentler, quieter, and closer to our own lives than we might believe. Crescent Moon. Myth 3. The Dancing Plague of 1518. Close your eyes and imagine a summer long ago, in the year 1518. The town is Strasbourg, nestled along the Rhine, where cobblestone streets wind past wooden houses and church bells echo softly in the distance. It is warm, the air heavy with sunlight, when something most unusual begins. A woman steps into the street and begins to dance. At first, it seems joyful, like a celebration, yet soon her movements become restless, then relentless. Hours pass. She does not stop. By the next day, more people join her. A week later, dozens are moving, swaying, and stamping their feet in an endless rhythm. Before long, nearly 400 souls are caught in this strange dance. The story is known today as the Dancing Plague of 1518, a tale so strange it sounds like legend, a carnival of motion that refused to end. Candle what really happened? For centuries, storytellers whispered that those caught in the dance were cursed, or that spirits had taken hold of their bodies. Some believe it was a punishment sent from above. Others thought it was a work of demons beneath. But historians, with gentler patience, suggest different causes. Some point to mass hysteria, what we now call mass psychogenic illness. In times of great stress, famine, sickness, or fear, groups of people can share not only emotions but physical symptoms. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city pressed down by hunger, by disease, and by the weight of hardship. Perhaps the dancing was not joy but an expression of despair, a body's release when words could not carry the pain. Others suggest ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus that grows on damp rye. This fungus can produce hallucinations and spasms, leading to movements that might seem like dancing. Yet this theory has softened under closer study, for ergot usually weakens rather than sustains. It makes people collapse, not dance for days. And so, the truth remains a gentle mystery. The plague of dancing was real, recorded in city notes and sermons, yet its cause lingers in shadow. Milky Way, why the story endures. Perhaps the dancing plague continues to fascinate us because it blurs the line between body and spirit, between health and mystery. It reminds us that human beings are deeply connected. When one trembles, others may follow. When one moves, others may join. It also speaks of the pressures of life in 1518. The people of Strasbourg live with hunger, with feared disease, with heavy taxes and spiritual burdens. In such a world, the dance may have been both protest and prayer, both despair and release. Crescent moon, the softer side of the tale. When we hear the phrase dancing plague, we may imagine wild joy, endless festivals, even comedy. But the truth is tender, almost sorrowful. Reports say that some dancers collapsed from exhaustion. Some died, though how many remains uncertain. City leaders, bewildered, tried music to accompany the dancers, thinking it might ease the frenzy. Instead, the rhythm only seemed to feed the movement. Finally, the dancers were led away, some taken to a shrine dedicated to a saint, in hope of healing. Slowly, the movement faded, leaving silence in its place. Sparkles what we might learn. The dancing plague is not just a curious footnote in history. It is also a reflection of what happens when human beings carry too much, when grief and hardship overflow. Our bodies, our communities, sometimes express what words cannot. Perhaps the lesson is not about disease or superstition, but about compassion. When we look back at the people of Strasbourg, we can see not just a strange plague, but neighbors, families, men and women whose burdens grew too heavy. Their dance was not madness, but a cry for release. Water waved a gentle closing. So tonight, as you drift into rest, you might picture those narrow streets long ago, the echo of footsteps, the sound of hands clapping, the rhythm of weary bodies moving together. It is not a tale of cruelty or of punishment, but of humans searching, in their own way, for freedom from suffering. The dancing plague of 1518 may never be fully explained, and perhaps it does not need to be. Some mysteries are meant to remain soft at the edges, reminding us that the past, like life itself, is not always meant to be solved, but felt. And as you close your eyes, let the image of those dancers fade into stillness, from chaos into quiet, from motion into rest, just as you, too, now drift from wakefulness into sleep. Crescent moon. Myth 4. The Knights Templar and Hidden Treasures. Imagine a twilight scene in the medieval world, where torchlight flickers across stone walls and the air hums with whispers of mystery. Among the most enduring legends of that time is the story of the Knights Templar, a brotherhood of warrior monks bound by faith, secrecy, and the sword. The tale most often told is that they guarded not only pilgrims and holy sites, but also a treasure beyond imagining, gold, relics, perhaps even the Holy Grail itself. When their order was dissolved in the early 1300s, the story goes, this treasure vanished, hidden away in secret vaults or spirited across seas. For centuries, poets, historians, and dreamers alike have wondered, what became of the Templars' riches? Candle, who were the Knights Templar? The Templars were founded in the early 12th century, during the era of the Crusades. Their original mission was simple, to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Yet in time, they grew powerful, wealthy, and deeply respected. They wore white mantles marked with a red cross, a symbol of both purity and sacrifice. They prayed as monks but fought as knights, disciplined and loyal. Soon, donations from kings and nobles flowed in, land, castles, and wealth, making the order one of the most influential institutions in medieval Europe. But with power came suspicion. By the early 14th century, under King Philip IV of France, the Templars were accused of heresy, corruption, and secret rituals. Many were arrested. Some were tortured. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake. And so the order fell, but not its legend. Milky Way, the birth of the treasure myth. The suppression of the Templars left behind unanswered questions. What became of their immense wealth? Their lands and buildings were seized, but rumors whisper of gold hidden away, relics spirited off before the arrests, and secret knowledge preserved in silence. The most enchanting part of the myth is that the Templars may have guarded sacred objects, the Ark of the Covenant, the Shroud of Turin, or even the Holy Grail itself. Writers from later centuries embroidered these tales, weaving the Templars into grand quests of mystery and adventure. Yet when we look closely, the truth is quieter. Most of the Templars' assets were not piles of treasure, but farmland, property, and practical resources. Much of it was absorbed by other orders, especially the Knights Hospitaller. The idea of vast golden hoards has little evidence behind it. Still, the legend persisted, growing with every retelling. Sparkles, why do we believe in hidden treasures? Perhaps the fascination lies not with what the Templars had, but with what we long for. Treasure stories offer hope. The idea that somewhere just beyond reach lies a secret that could change everything. Gold, relics, or wisdom hidden beneath the earth. The Templars, wrapped in secrecy and ended by betrayal, became perfect vessels for this longing. Their sudden fall made it easy to imagine that they left behind unfinished business, mysteries buried with them in hidden vaults or in the silent stones of old chapels. Crescent moon, a softer reflection. In truth, the greatest treasure of the Templars may not have been gold or relics at all. It was a trust they built, the financial systems they pioneered, the way they safeguarded pilgrims and stabilized kingdoms. Some historians even see them as early inventors of banking, for travelers could deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another under Templar protection. This, too, is a kind of treasure, one that shaped the world quietly, invisibly, but enduringly. And yet, the myths remain important. They remind us of the human desire for mystery, for the idea that history still hides secrets just waiting to be found. Water waved the whisper of time. So, when you hear the story of the Templars and their hidden treasure, you may let the golden chests and glowing relics fade gently into shadow. In their place, imagine something quieter. Knights keeping vigil, hands folded in prayer, their wealth measured not in jewels but in faith and discipline. The treasure we inherit is the story itself. The way it sparks wonder, keeps curiosity alive, and allows us to dream of secret chambers and hidden maps. Milky Way at gentle closing. As you drift toward sleep, let the mystery of the Templars soften around you. Picture their white mantles against the dusk, the red cross glowing faintly in the twilight. Their treasure, whether real or imagined, is less important than the feeling it leaves us with. That history is full of shadows and whispers, and sometimes the most precious riches are not found in gold, but in the imagination inspires. And so, like the Templars fading into legend, may your thoughts tonight slip quietly into rest. Carry with them the comfort of stories that endure across the centuries. Crescent Moon. Myth 5. The Werewolves of Medieval Europe. Close your eyes and imagine a medieval village at night. The moon hangs heavy and pale above the rooftops, its glow spilling gently across fields and forests. A hush settles in the air, broken only by the wind brushing through trees. Yet in the quiet, there lingers a whisper, a story told by firelight, of men who could become wolves, of neighbors who might, under the spell of moonlight, shed their skin and walk the night on four legs. This is the myth of the werewolf, one of the most enduring legends of medieval Europe. Candle, the birth of the werewolf tale. The idea of humans transforming into beasts is older than the Middle Ages. Ancient Greece told stories of King Lycan, who was turned into a wolf as punishment for defying the gods. In Norse sagas, warriors wore wolfskins to channel the power of the wild. But in medieval Europe, the werewolf myth took on a darker, more fearful shape. Wolves themselves were both feared and revered. Predators lurking on the edges of villages, symbols of danger in the deep forest that seemed endless to those who lived in their shadows. To imagine a human becoming such a creature was both terrifying and strangely captivating. Milky Way fear and belief in the Middle Ages. In an age where unexplained events were often seen as signs of the supernatural, the werewolf was more than a story. It was a way of making sense of violence, illness, or even cruelty. When a village awoke to find livestock slaughtered, the whisper might spread. It was no ordinary wolf. It was one of us. In times of famine, when hunger drove people to desperate acts, accusations of werewolfery gave form to fears that humanity itself could turn predatory. Trials for supposed werewolves did occur, especially in regions of France and Germany. Accused men, and sometimes women, were said to have made pacts with dark forces, donning enchanted belts or ointments that let them transform beneath the moon. Of course, many of these accusations were fueled by superstition, fear, and misunderstanding of illness or mental distress. Yet the story stuck, becoming part of Europe's folklore. Sparkles why the werewolf endured. Why do such myths last? Perhaps because the werewolf is not only about fear of the wilderness. It is about fear of ourselves. The wolf within is a metaphor for the darker impulses of humanity: anger, greed, violence. in the safe glow of the hearth. People could whisper these tales and, in doing so, give shape to the shadows they carried inside. The myth allowed communities to confront the uneasy truth that the line between human and beast can feel fragile. At the same time, the werewolf carried a strange allure. To run through the forest with sharp senses and untamed freedom, this was frightening, but also enchanting. The myth spoke not only of danger, but of longing, the dream of breaking free from the burdens of daily life. Crescent moon, a softer reflection. When we step back, the werewolf tale becomes less about monsters and more about humanity. It reflects how medieval people saw the world, a place where nature was vast and untamed, where the supernatural brushed against the everyday, and where stories helped explain what could not be controlled. And perhaps it also reflects something timeless. Even today, the image of the werewolf lingers in books, films, and imagination. It is not just a relic of the past, but a mirror we continue to hold up to ourselves. Waterway from fear to comfort. As the centuries passed, wolves themselves grew scarcer in Europe, and within the terror the werewolf began to soften. Yet the myth remained, transformed into legend and later into entertainment. For us now, the werewolf no longer crouches at the edge of the forest, waiting to pounce. It rests instead in our stories, gentler, symbolic, a companion of imagination rather than a creature of fear. Milky Way at gentle closing. So, as you lie in the quiet of your own evening, let the werewolf return to its shadowed forest. Picture the moonlight falling softly across the trees, the silent paths where once, long ago, villagers thought beasts walked among them. The myth reminds us that even in times of fear, people found ways to weave meaning into the unknown. They told stories not just to frighten, but to understand, to share, and to comfort themselves against the dark. And as your eyes grow heavy, let the wolves of the past fade into memory. What lingers is not their terror, but the calm truth that stories are how we turn fear into something softer, something that guides us gently toward rest. Crescent moon. Myth 6, the berserkers. Imagine a cold northern night. The air is crisp, the stars bright above the long stretch of forest and fjord. A fire flickers in a Viking hall, shadows dancing on wooden beams, while voices rise in song and story. Among the tales most often whispered with awe and trembling is that of the berserkers, warriors set to fight in a trance of fury, shieldless, fearless, unstoppable. Their very name has become a legend, a symbol of strength untamed by fear. But who were they truly? Candle the shape of the myth. The word berserker likely means bear shirt or bear shirt. In sagas, these warriors are described as fighting without armor, perhaps clad only in animal skins. When battle came, they were said to fall into a frenzy, howling, biting their shields, striking with inhuman force, immune to pain. To their enemies, they were monsters in human form. To their allies, they were both blessing and danger, able to turn the tide of war, yet unpredictable, wild, difficult to control. The stories speak of men who could channel the spirit of animals, most often the bear or the wolf. To become a berserker was to shed the softness of humanity and take on the untamed power of the wild. Milky Way, the world that birthed them. In the Viking Age, the natural world was immense, beautiful, and threatening. Bears and wolves roamed the forest, symbols of both strength and danger. Battles were brutal, survival uncertain, and faith in gods like Odin, the god of war, wisdom, and frenzy, shaped how warriors saw themselves. The berserkers fit perfectly into this world. They embodied the boundary between human and animal, between control and chaos, between the known and the mystical. Some scholars believe they may have entered altered states through rituals, chants, or perhaps even plants and mushrooms that heightened their senses. Others think the frenzy was psychological, a cultivated state of rage brought on by faith and will. Sparkles between truth and tale. The sagas, written centuries after the Viking Age, describe berserkers vividly, but how much is fact and how much is legend? Evidence suggests that some warriors may indeed have fought in such states of fury. Chroniclers outside of Scandinavia wrote of Viking warriors who seemed beyond fear, who rushed into combat heedless of wounds. Yet the supernatural details, the immunity to fire, the magical transformations, likely grew in the telling. What remains true is the power of the image, men so fierce that their very presence became larger than life. Crescent moon, a symbol beyond the battlefield. The Berserker myth is not only about war. It is about the human relationship with wildness. To the Vikings, who lived in close connection with nature, the idea of channeling animal strength was deeply resonant. The Berserker was not simply a warrior. He was a reminder that within every human lies a spark of the untamed, a connection to forces older and stronger than ourselves. Even today, the word berserk carries that echo. It means to lose control, to be consumed by frenzy. But beneath it is the memory of a time when such frenzy was both feared and revered. Water wave a softer reflection. When we look at the Berserker legend now, softened by centuries, it becomes less about blood and battle and more about the human imagination. It speaks of the longing to transcend limits, to borrow strength from something greater, to stand fearless in the face of danger. We may never know exactly what rituals or beliefs lay behind the Berserker's rage, but perhaps that is the heart of the myth. It endures because it leaves room for wonder, for possibility that humans can touch something beyond themselves, even if only in story. Milky Way, a gentle closing. So, as you rest tonight, let the clash of battle fade into silence. Picture instead the flicker of firelight on a long winter's night, where sagas are told to pass the time. The Berserkers rise from those stories, fierce and untamed, yet softened now by the centuries. They remind us that strength comes in many forms, sometimes wild, sometimes quiet. And as your eyes grow heavy, let their roar transform into a lullaby, carrying you gently towards sleep, where even the fiercest myths become whispers in the dark. Crescent Moon. Myth 7. Robin Hood and the Black Knight. Close your eyes and let your mind wander to the green heart of England, where ancient forests once stretched wide and endless. The wind rustles through Sherwood's tall oaks. Shafts of sunlight scatter across the moss, and in the distance, the faint tune of a lute drifts on the air. It is here that one of the most beloved figures of medieval legend makes his home. Robin Hood, the outlaw who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. But alongside the familiar tales of merry men and woodland feasts, there's a darker, lesser-known story. The story of Robin Hood and the Black Knight. Candle, the familiar hero in a shifting world. Robin Hood is a figure woven from many threads. Part history, part ballad, part myth. In the oldest songs, he is an outlaw living on the edges of society, clever and bold, always one step ahead of sheriffs and lords. Over the centuries, the details change. Sometimes he is a commoner, sometimes a nobleman fallen from grace. Always, though, he is a champion of the oppressed, the one who bends his bow in defense of the poor. The tale of the Black Knight emerges within this shifting tradition, a reminder that Robin's legend was never static. Like all myths, it grew and changed with each telling. Milky Way, the shadow of the Black Knight. In some versions of the story, the Black Knight appears as a mysterious challenger, a figure cloaked in darkness, faceless beneath his visor. He represents more than a single foe. He is the embodiment of authority, of the unknown, of the forces that threaten freedom in a feudal world. Sometimes the Black Knight is said to be a servant of Prince John, sent to hunt Robin through the greenwood. In other tellings, he is a stranger whose loyalties are unclear, a test for Robin's courage and wit. And in a few rare ballads, the Black Knight becomes not an enemy but an unlikely ally, one who reveals, after the duel, that he too stands against injustice. The Black Knight is the mirror to Robin, both skilled, both cloaked in secrecy, yet standing on opposite sides of a moral divide, sparkles between history and ballad. Did Robin Hood truly face a Black Knight? History gives no answer, for Robin himself may never have been a single man, but rather a collection of stories bound together over centuries. The Black Knight, too, is likely a literary invention, born of the medieval imagination, where knights in shining armor and their darker counterparts stood as symbols of power, danger, and mystery. Yet the myth matters more than fact. The clash between Robin and the Black Knight is not simply about swords and bows. It is about the timeless struggle between freedom and oppression, between light and shadow. Crescent Moon, why the tale endures. Perhaps what makes this story so enduring is the balance it strikes between hope and fear. Robin Hood is a reassuring presence, the outlaw who laughs even in danger, who believes in fairness in an unfair world. The black night is a reminder that darkness exists, that justice is not easily won. When listeners heard these ballads by firelight in medieval taverns or villages, they could find comfort in Robin's cleverness, but they also felt the thrill of the unknown in the Black Knight's shadowy figure. The tale was both entertainment and reflection, both lullaby and warning. Water wave a softer reflection. Today, as we retell the story, the sharp edges of fear soften. The Black Knight becomes less a threat and more a symbol, a reminder that every hero needs a challenge to define him. Robin's courage shines brighter because of the shadow that stands against him. And perhaps, in the end, the tale is not about their duel at all. It is about balance between light and dark, joy and sorrow, hope and doubt. The Black Knight gives form to the struggles we all face, while Robin gives us the reassurance that cleverness, kindness, and courage can prevail. Milky Way, a gentle closing. So now, let the forest grow still in your imagination. The leaves hush, the campfire glows softly, and the sound of bowstrings fades into silence. Robin Hood walks once more beneath the oaks, his figure calm, steady, eternal. Somewhere in the shadows, the Black Knight lingers, a reminder of the trials that give meaning to every victory. As you rest, hold close the comfort of the tale, that even when shadows gather, there is always light in the greenwood, always a song to be sung, always a story to guide us gently through the night. Crescent Moon, Myth 8, Friday the 13th, and the Templars. The calendar turns slowly in your mind, its pages fluttering like leaves in the wind. Numbers and dates pass by without weight, until one day stands out, a day whisper with unease. Friday the 13th. In the modern world, this date has become a symbol of misfortune. People avoid travel, hesitate to make plans, and sometimes smile nervously at their own superstitions. But behind the unease lies a much older story, one tied to the Knights Templar, those warrior monks of the Middle Ages whose rise and fall are as dramatic as any legend. Candled the Knights of the Cross and the Sword. The Knights Templar were born in the early 12th century, in the wake of the First Crusade. They were warrior monks, sworn to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Dressed in white mantles adorned with red cross, they became one of the most powerful military and financial orders of the medieval world. They were not only soldiers, but also bankers, guardians of wealth, and trusted advisors to kings. Their network stretched across Europe and the Middle East, and their reputation for discipline and secrecy only fueled the air of mystery around them. But with power came envy, and with wealth came danger. Milky Way, the fateful Friday. On the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of the Templars across his kingdom. The charges were shocking. Heresy, blasphemy, dark rituals whispered in the shadows. Knights were seized from their commanderies, dragged into prisons, subjected to confessions under torture. The once mighty order crumbled in the face of the king's ambition and the Pope's uneasy compliance. Among those arrested was a Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, who would later be burned at the stake, his ashes scattered in the wind. With his death, the Templars' earthly power ended, but their legend was only beginning. Sparkles the birth of a superstition. Why has Friday the 13th become such a potent symbol of bad luck? Some historians trace it directly to that morning in 1307, when the Templars' downfall began. The day marked betrayal, the fall of protectors, and the triumph of greed over faith. Others note that Friday was already considered an unlucky day in medieval Christian tradition, and the number 13 carried its own shadow, tied to the Last Supper and the betrayal of Christ. When these threads wove together, the unlucky day, the unlucky number, and the tragedy of the Templars, a superstition was born, crescent moon between truth and legend. It is difficult to say with certainty whether Friday, the 13th, owes all its power to the Templars. Superstitions often grow slowly, layer by layer, until their origins blur. What is clear, however, is that the Templars' dramatic fall gave the date a story, a sense of weight, a memory that lingered in Europe's imagination. Even centuries later, whispers of secret rituals, hidden treasures, and curses would follow their name. The Templars became symbols of mystery, their fate forever linked to the unease of a date on the calendar. Water waved a softer reflection. Today, as we glance nervously at Friday the 13th, It is not fear of knights or kings that stirs within us, but something gentler. The recognition that history leaves echoes, and those echoes find their way into our lives in unexpected ways. The Templars remind us that even the mighty can fall, and that the stories of their fall can linger long after. They also remind us of how myth and memory entwine, shaping the way we see not just the past, but the present too. Milky Way at gentle closing. So now, as you drift into rest, imagine the quiet streets of Paris on that autumn morning in 1307. The sun rises, the bells toll, and the world shifts as armored men are taken in chains. Their names fade, their halls are empty, but their story remains. Friday the 13th is no longer only a date. It is a whisper from history, a reminder that behind superstition lies memory, and behind memory lies the fragile thread of human lives. As sleep gathers around you, let the weight of those stories soften into calm, the fear dissolve into wonder, and the legend of the Templars become not a curse, but a lullaby carried gently into the night. Crescent Moon, Part 3, Beyond Medieval, Ancient Intimacies and Hidden Lives. Crescent Moon, a gentle transition. We have walked through the winding streets of the Middle Ages, brushed our fingers against myths that once frightened or inspired. Now, let us drift even further back into the quiet chambers of the ancient world. Here, history speaks not with battles or kings, but with whispers of intimacy, of how people loved, lived, and dreamt behind closed doors. These are stories less often told, yet they remind us that, across time, human beings have always sought warmth, closeness, and meaning in one another. Tonight, we open that softer door, Pompeii's whispered secrets. Close your eyes and let your mind drift back nearly 2,000 years. Imagine the Bay of Naples shimmering under the Mediterranean sun, the gentle hum of markets, the laughter echoing from marble courtyards, the scent of bread baking in stone ovens. This was Pompeii, yet beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, silence was waiting, and one day, that silence would descend with ash and fire. Candle, a city frozen in time. In 79 C, but the tragedy preserved what might otherwise have been lost. Beneath the ash lay not only the bodies of Pompeii's citizens, but their stories. Graffiti on walls, jars of wine sealed tight, jewelry resting beside skeletons. An entire world stopped mid-breath, waiting to whisper its secrets centuries later. Milky Way whispers from the walls. When archaeologists first uncovered Pompeii in the 18th century, they were astonished. Streets were still lined with taverns. Paintings still shone with vibrant colors. Even loaves of bread, carbonized but intact, lay in ovens as though dinner had been paused. But perhaps the most intimate discoveries were the whispers scratched into walls. Graffiti revealed jokes, confessions of love, boasts of gladiators, and simple notes of longing. In one home, a message reads, "We two dear men, friends forever, were here." In another, these words remind us that Pompeii's people were not distant figures in history. They loved, they quarreled, they dreamed, just as we do. Sparkle secrets of desire and daily life. Pompeii also revealed what many Roman writers left unspoken. Hidden chambers and murals spoke openly of intimacy, desire, and human connection. Brothels were decorated with frescoes that showed scenes of affection in vivid detail. Homes held amulets meant to ward off envy or invite fertility. For centuries, these findings were locked away in secret cabinets, thought too scandalous for public eyes. Yet now they are recognized not as curiosities, but as reflections of real human lives. People who sought love, pleasure, and protection in a fragile world. Pompeii's whispers remind us that history is not only grand battles and emperors. It is also the quiet, tender details of ordinary lives. Crescent Moon echoes in ash. The plaster casts of Pompeii's victims are among its most haunting secrets. Archaeologists discovered that by pouring plaster into the hollow spaces left in the ash, they could recreate the final postures of those who perished. Some appear peaceful, as if asleep. Others are caught in gestures of despair, arms raised, bodies curled. Yet even here, there is a strange softness. These figures, though frozen in tragedy, speak a connection. Families held together, a dog still chained at his post, lovers embracing as the world darkened around them. The whispers of Pompeii are not only about death, They are about love enduring even in the final breath. Water wave lessons in fragility. Pompeii's secrets reach across time not to frighten us, but to remind us life is fragile. Cities rise and fall, yet in that fragility lies beauty. The laughter etched into graffiti, the care in a home's design, the love in final embraces, all endure, even when the world changes. To walk Pompeii streets today is to hear a chorus of voices reminding us to treasure the simple moments, the taste of bread, the warmth of sunlight, the nearness of someone we love. Sacred connections, temples of love. Close your eyes and imagine walking through ancient stone pathways, softened by centuries of footsteps. The air is warm, fragrant with incense and blossoms. Ahead rise temples, ornate, carved, radiant with devotion. These are not just houses of gods, but sanctuaries of love, where human longing and divine grace once intertwined. Across the world, from India to Greece, from Mesopotamia to South America, temples were built not only to honor the heavens, but also to celebrate the mysteries of desire, intimacy, and connection. Within their walls, people sought blessings for fertility, harmony, and companionship, seeking not only the favor of gods, but the healing of the heart. Candle temples of the heart in ancient India. In the lush heart of India rise the temples of Khajuraho, adorned with sculptures that seem to breathe with life, figures entwined in tender embrace, carved in stone yet filled with warmth. For centuries, travelers misunderstood these carvings, dismissing them as indecent or frivolous. But in truth, they tell a deeper story, that love, both earthly and divine, is sacred. The art reflects a belief that intimacy is not a distraction from spirituality, but a path toward it. For the people who once worshipped there, these temples were reminders that the body and soul are not enemies but companions, guiding each other toward harmony. Cherry blossom Aphrodite's gardens in Greece. Far away, in the bright world of ancient Greece, shrines of Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, blossomed by the sea. Devotees offered flowers, perfumes, and vows in her honor, hoping for joy in marriage, the spark of romance, or the blessing of children. The rituals were gentle, prayers whispered by young women, garlands placed on statues, small doves released into the sky. Yet beneath the simple offerings lay profound hope, that love, fragile as it is, might endure with divine protection. These sacred spaces reminded worshippers that love was not only passion, but also a bond that wove communities together. Sparkles Inanna's legacy in Mesopotamia. Even earlier, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the goddess Inanna, queen of heaven and love, was honored in temples that shimmered with ritual and devotion. Here, priestesses served not only as caretakers of sacred rites, but also as bridges between mortal desire and divine blessing. Songs of Inanna spoke of passion, tenderness, and renewal. Through ritual, the people sought her favor, believing that love, fertility, and abundance were threads woven together in the fabric of life. The temples were not places of shame but of celebration, where the vulnerability of a human heart found sanctuary. Crescent moon, the mystery of the Americas. Across the oceans, in the temples of the Maya and Aztec, carvings and rituals link fertility, harvest, and love. Though often tied to cycles of the earth, these rites acknowledge the same truth, that love is part of the rhythm of survival. To honor the gods was also to honor the bonds that sustain families, communities, and the future. Waterway whispers of unity. Though separated by oceans and centuries, these temples shared a gentle wisdom. That love, whether tender or passionate, fleeting or enduring, was sacred. They recognized that intimacy could heal, that companionship could strengthen, and that desire, far from being a weakness, was a gift from the divine. In their stones and carvings, in their rituals and prayers, these sacred spaces whispered a timeless truth. To love is to connect, and through connection, we touch the eternal. Sparta's unusual bonds. Close your eyes and let the sands of time carry you to the rugged valleys of ancient Greece. The air here is sharper, the earth more austere. This is Sparta, a land famed for warriors. Yet behind the clashing of shields lay bonds far softer and far stranger than many would expect. For while Sparta's armies marched across history with discipline and might, their lives at home and the ties they formed with one another were equally remarkable. These unusual bonds reveal that even in a society built for war, love, and companionship quietly shaped the heart of its people. Candle, the warrior's bond. In Sparta, soldiers did not fight alone. From boyhood, they were taken into the agoge, the rigorous training system that bound them to their peers for life. Within these groups, boys became men, men became warriors, and warriors became brothers. Some of these bonds deepened into intimate companionships, viewed not as weakness but as strength. The belief was simple. A man would fight more fiercely when standing beside someone he cherished. In the silence of Spartan nights, amid flickering campfires, loyalty was not forged only in iron, but also in affection. Cherry blossom women of strength. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan women walked a different path. They trained in athletics, spoke their minds, and managed households while men were away. Their independence puzzled outsiders, but in Sparta, it was essential. Marriage customs were unusual too. A bride might be taken in secrecy, her hair cut short, her presence hidden in shadow until the bond was sealed. Some accounts speak of husbands visiting their wives only briefly, slipping away by night to return to communal barracks. This distance was not neglect, but tradition, a way of keeping warriors bound to their comrades while still nurturing family life. In these practices, love took forms both restrained and enduring, strengthened by patience and separation, sparkles bonds beyond blood. Spartan society also placed weight on chosen bonds, not just familial ones. Older men mentored younger warriors, not only in skill but in values, creating ties that were deeply personal. These relationships blurred the lines between teacher, comrade, and beloved. It was through such ties that Sparta's fierce unity was born. The city thrived not because of its iron alone, but because of the invisible threads of connection that wove its people together. Crescent moon between duty and desire. Yet even within Sparta's unusual customs, tenderness endured. Husbands cherished wives they saw too rarely. Mothers, though accustomed to sacrifice, whispered blessings to their sons before battle. Lovers within the ranks held fast to each other, knowing each day might be their last. These bonds were not only about survival, they were about finding warmth in a world built on discipline. They remind us that even the harshest societies carry within them the quiet strength of love. Waterwave lessons from Sparta. From afar, Sparta seems unyielding, steel, shields, and discipline. But when we listen closely, its whispers tell a different story. That strength is not only forged in battle, but also in connection. In the friendships of warriors, in the resilience of women, in the hidden tenderness of marriages, we see a truth that spans time. Love adapts. It bends to culture, to duty, to circumstance. Yet it endures, shaping lives even where it seems least expected. Hidden lives of women. Close your eyes and let the world grow still. Imagine the whispers of time, carrying us into the lives of women who lived centuries ago. Their stories were often hidden in shadows, tucked away behind walls, recorded faintly, if at all. And yet, if we listen carefully, we can hear their voices, soft but enduring, rise into the silence of history. Candle behind the veil of ancient homes. In many lands, women's worlds were bound by thresholds, the home, the courtyard, the market stall. To outsiders, their lives may have seemed quiet, almost invisible. But within those walls, entire universes unfolded. A mother's lullaby carried strength as profound as any general's command. A daughter's weaving preserved not just fabric, but tradition. Women shaped the rhythm of life through daily acts, preparing food, keeping the hearth, caring for family. Though uncelebrated, these threads held societies together. Cherry blossomed the hidden strength of Spartan women. In Sparta, unlike much of Greece, women stepped into roles that startled outsiders. They trained their bodies, managed estates, and spoke boldly, while their husbands lived in barracks. Spartan women carried the weight of continuity. To other Greeks, their freedom seemed unusual, even scandalous. Yet their hidden strength ensured that Sparta endured. Behind every warrior was the steady hand of a mother, a wife, or a sister who gave him courage to return, or to accept he might never come home. Sparkle's medieval women in the shadows. Centuries later, in medieval Europe, women's lives became woven into the quiet work of households and convents. Noble ladies ruled estates when men were away. Peasant women tilled fields, baked bread, and raised children, often laboring harder than the histories admit. And in convents, women found a paradoxical kind of freedom. Though cloistered, they wrote hymns, copied manuscripts, and even influenced politics through letters. In the hush of candlelight, they preserved knowledge while the outside world stormed with wars and crusades. Crescent moon whispers of desire and devotion. There were also hidden stories of intimacy, of love letters never meant to be seen, of friendships between women that blossomed into quiet tenderness. Some accounts, faint but real, suggest that bonds between women were deeper than mere companionship. Though history rarely preserved these details, we can sense them between the lines, in poetry, in song, in careful metaphors about longing. In those whispers, we find women reaching for connection in ways society did not name, but hearts still knew. Waterway beyond silence. Even when silenced, women found ways to leave traces. A carved spindle, a fragment of embroidery, a name written in the margins of a manuscript. These small remnants are like stars in the night sky, tiny but illuminating. Together, they remind us that women's lives, though hidden, were never absent. Their presence is stitched into every culture, every age. Without them, the story of humanity would unravel. Love beyond norms. Close your eyes and let the world soften around you. Tonight, we drift across centuries into stories of love that dare to move beyond the boundaries of custom and law. History often tried to contain love within rules, dictating who could marry, who could desire, who could even dream of companionship. Yet the heart, ever stubborn, followed its own path. In whispers and in shadows, in poems and in secrets, people found ways to love beyond norms. Candle forbidden bonds in ancient times. In the courts of emperors and the markets of commoners, love often crossed lines drawn by society. A noble might fall for a servant. A monk might feel his heart stir for someone cloaked in silence. These stories were rarely written, but they flicker in the margins of history. For many, love was a quiet rebellion. To hold someone's hand when no one was looking. To write a letter hidden beneath a pillow. These small acts carried more weight than any decree. They were whispers of defiance, but also whispers of hope. Cherry blossom love between women, in monasteries and convents, where walls were meant to separate hearts from earthly longing. Women sometimes found one another. They exchanged letters filled with longing or hymns that doubled as love songs. Their bonds could never be declared, but within the safety of candlelight, affection bloomed. Though their voices were often silenced, their traces remain, faint but persistent. And in imagining their hidden joys, we glimpse a truth. Love has always existed in forms far beyond the limits of tradition. Sparkles companionship among warriors. Among men, too, bonds sometimes deepen into something more. In Sparta, in Rome, even in medieval knights' orders, warriors formed attachments that blurred the line between loyalty and love. To the world, they were comrades. To themselves, they were something deeper. These relationships were not spoken of openly, but they shaped courage on the battlefield. When men fought not only for honor, but for someone whose life mattered more than their own, their love became as enduring as the steel they carried. Crescent moon love across boundaries. There were also stories of lovers who crossed boundaries of religion, culture, and class. In medieval towns, Christian and Jewish youths sometimes fell in love despite the dangers. In ancient cities, slaves and citizens found ways to weave affection into their lives, even when society declared it forbidden. These loves were fragile, often fleeting, yet profoundly human. They remind us that desire cannot be neatly contained. It spills over walls and laws, reaching for connection wherever it finds warmth. Waterwave lessons from hidden loves. When we gather these fragments together, they form a tapestry of resilience. Love beyond norms is not only about romance. It is about the courage to honor the heart's truth, even when the world insists on silence. It tells us that humanity has always sought connection, in ways both quiet and fierce. And though many of these stories remain untold, they continue to echo in the way we understand love today. Fluid, expansive, and unafraid to defy convention. The continuity of tenderness. Close your eyes and let yourself drift into the hush of memory. Tonight, We follow not battles or grand events, but something quieter, more enduring, the continuity of tenderness. History often records kings and wars, laws and monuments. Yet beneath these loud stories, there's always been another current. The small acts of care, the gestures of love, the moments of softness that carried humanity forward. Tenderness is not bound by time. It flows from one generation to the next, like a stream winding through centuries. Candle ancient echoes of care. In the households of ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets recorded laws and trade. But alongside them, we find lullabies, mothers writing songs to soothe their children's sleep. Their words, carved into fragile clay, remind us that tenderness mattered as much as power. In Egypt, a husband might place a flower into his wife's hand during a festival. The gesture was never written into history books, but in the quiet space of daily life, tenderness bloomed. These moments, though small, carried the weight of eternity. Cherry blossom medieval comforts. Centuries later, in medieval Europe, tenderness persisted in forms both hidden and ordinary. Women embroidered prayers into clothing, stitching blessings into the hems of garments worn by loved ones. Knights carried tokens, a ribbon, a glove, a lock of hair, as symbols of affection that gave them strength in battle. Even in monasteries, where silence ruled, monks cared for one another with simple acts, sharing bread, tending to the sick, placing a hand on a shoulder. Such gestures whispered what words could not. That tenderness endures, even in the strictest places. Sparkles love across generations. Tenderness also lives in continuity. The way a grandmother teaches a lullaby to her granddaughter, or how a recipe passes from one pair of hands to the next. These small inheritances keep love alive. In every culture, we find traces of this continuity. A cradle song in Iceland that echoes one from Persia, or a folk tale in Africa that carries the same gentle rhythm as one in Asia. Across distances and centuries, tenderness speaks a universal language, reminding us that our humanity is shared. Crescent moon tenderness against hardness. There were times when the world seemed unyielding, eras of famine, plague, and war. Yet even then, tenderness did not disappear. A neighbor might share bread with another. A healer might stay by a bedside long after hope was gone. A soldier might write a letter filled not with conquest, but with longing and care. These quiet acts are easy to overlook, yet they carried people through darkness. They reveal that tenderness is not weakness. It is strength in its most human form. Water wave the river that flows on. When we pause to notice it, tenderness reveals itself everywhere. In lullabies and letters, in gifts and gestures, in the soft way someone speaks another's name. It is a river, winding quietly, refusing to dry up even when the land around it grows barren. And so, across centuries, tenderness continues. It is a thread that ties us to those who came before, and the gift we pass on to those who come after. Milky Way, a gentle closing. Now, as sleep draws near, imagine this river of tenderness flowing through time, touching ancient cradles, medieval hearts, and modern homes alike. It runs beneath the surface of history, carrying with it the softness that makes life bearable. Perhaps the greatest legacy humanity has is not monuments or empires, but this, the ability to be tender with one another, to soothe, to comfort, to love. So as night gathers around you, let yourself rest in the continuity of tenderness, eternal, gentle, and always near. Crescent Moon, Part 4, Echoes Across Time, Lessons and Reflections. Crescent Moon, the gentle echo. Every story we have wandered through, whether from medieval streets or ancient sanctuaries, has left a soft echo behind. These echoes are not loud or demanding. They are like the hush of waves on the shore, reminding us quietly that history is not only about kings, battles, and monuments. It is also about the tender ways people search for meaning and the myths they carry like lanterns in the dark. Myths as mirrors. Close your eyes and let the weight of the day fall away. Tonight, we linger with myths, not as strange tales of dragons or gods, but as mirrors. For myths, in their shimmering surfaces, reflect not only the worlds they describe, but the hearts of the people who shaped them. When we gaze into a myth, we see our own longings, our fears, our tenderness disguised as story. Across centuries, these mirrors invite us to recognize ourselves and find comfort in knowing we are not alone. Candle, reflections of fear. Myths often bloom from shadows. Medieval villagers whispered of werewolves lurking in the forest, their glowing eyes a reflection of the night's dangers. In truth, the myth was not about beasts at all. It was about human fear. Fear of hunger, of the unknown, of the violence that sometimes lived inside their own neighbors. By telling stories of monsters, people gave form to their worries, and by naming them, they found a way to live with them. The werewolf was not just a creature of legend. It was a mirror of the anxieties that haunted the human soul. Cherry blossom mirrors a desire. Not all myths grew from fear. Some grew from yearning. Think of the tale of Robin Hood, the outlaw who stole from the rich to give to the poor. Beneath the greenwood tree, he became a reflection of what people longed for. Fairness, kindness, a world where justice had a human face. The myth of Robin Hood was less about arrows and more about dreams. It was a mirror of a society aching for balance, where the powerless could believe in the possibility of hope. Sparkles love in mythic form. Myths also reflect tenderness. In ancient temples, stories of gods and goddesses in love reminded mortals that desire, devotion, and heartbreak were not theirs alone. When Aphrodite wept, or when Shiva danced in longing, people saw their own emotions mirrored in divine form. These stories whispered that love, whether fulfilled or broken, is part of the human story, and in seeing their hearts reflected in myth, people found solace. Crescent moon lessons across ages. What is striking is how myths repeat across cultures. Dragons appear in both East and West. Floods wash across stories from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. Tricksters laugh in the fires of Africa and in the forests of North America. The mirrors may have different frames, but the reflections are the same. Humanity grappling with nature, with mortality, with the need to belong. Myths reveal that across distance and centuries, we have always been united by the same questions. Water wave myths as personal mirrors. Even today, myths reflect us. When we revisit them, we see more than the past. We see our present selves. A listener today might hear the tale of the Iron Maiden and recognize how fear can be exaggerated by rumor. Another might hear the story of Pope Joan and think of voices silenced by power. In this way, myths are not frozen relics. They are mirrors polished and new each time a story is told. They show us not only what was, but also what is, and even what might be. Lessons in fragility. Tonight, let us drift into the gentlest of truths, that life, for all its strength, is also fragile. History, like a soft voice carried on the wind, teaches us this lesson again and again, and though fragility might sound like weakness, in its tender light we find wisdom, resilience, and a deeper way to love. Candle, fragile bodies, strong hearts. In medieval villages, winters were long and food was scarce. Illness could sweep through a home in days, reminding families how delicate the thread of life could be. And yet, within this fragility, people learned to hold one another more closely. A mother humming a lullaby to a fevered child, a neighbor sharing a loaf of bread. These were quiet acts of survival, born from knowing how precious and fleeting each day could be. Fragility taught them that tenderness was not optional. It was necessary, as vital as warmth in the cold. Cherry blossomed the fragility of empires. Even great powers, clad in stone walls and armor, proved fragile. Castles crumbled, kingdoms dissolved, and rulers who once seemed unshakable faded into the margins of memory. Pompeii, with all its bustling streets and laughter, was silenced in a single night beneath volcanic ash. From these ruins, history whispers a truth. No matter how grand, every human creation carries the softness of impermanence. Instead of despairing, we can let this remind us to savor the moments that are here, shimmering and alive. Sparkle's fragile bonds. Love, too, has always known fragility. Letters carried by riders across dangerous roads could be lost. A reunion might be delayed by war. A promise might falter under the weight of time. And yet, the very delicacy of these bonds gave them beauty. It was because love was fragile that people treasured it so fiercely. A pressed flower in a book, a token worn into battle, a whispered vow beneath a quiet sky. Each was a reminder that love mattered because it could not be guaranteed. Crescent moon fragility as teacher. Fragility also teaches humility. When monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, a spilled drop of ink could ruin hours of work. When farmers planted their crops, a sudden frost could undo months of labor. And so, people learned patience, acceptance, and gratitude. The fragility of their world shaped virtues that still guide us today. To work with care, to endure with grace, and to cherish what cannot last. Water wave a continuity of fragility. What is striking is that fragility has always been with us, and always will be. Our technologies may change, our buildings may grow taller, but beneath it all, we remain tender beings with fragile hearts and fleeting days. This is not a burden, but a gift, for fragility is what teaches us to slow down, to notice the sunlight on a wall, to hear the laughter of someone we love, to breathe deeply into this moment. Without fragility, we might forget how miraculous it is simply to be alive. The resilience of imagination. Close your eyes and let us wander into the quiet realm of imagination. For fragility reminds us of life's delicate nature. Imagination shows us the strength that endures. Empires rise and fall, bodies grow weary, but imagination, soft, invisible, and boundless, remains. It is the quiet resilience that has carried humanity across centuries. Candle imagination survives ruins. When Pompeii was covered in ash, its streets and voices silenced, what lingered beyond the ruins were the stories people would later imagine. Historians pieced together lives, artists painted scenes, travelers whispered about the lovers caught in stone. The city's body had crumbled, but its memory was reborn in imagination. Even in destruction, the mind painted pictures, reminding us that imagination can survive where walls cannot. Cherry blossom medieval dreams. In the long nights of the medieval world, when candles flickered and winds howled outside wooden shutters, imagination became a sanctuary. Children dreamed of knights and saints. Adults imagined heaven's warmth, or even just the comfort of spring's return. Through myths of werewolves and tales of Robin Hood, imagination offered both fear and hope. It allowed people to step outside their hardships and glimpse something larger than hunger or war. The resilience of imagination was a resilience of spirit, sparkles the hidden power of stories. Imagination does not merely survive, it transforms. Consider the myth of the Black Knight, faceless and mysterious. To some, he was a warning of danger. To others, a symbol of courage. The story shifted, reshaped, endured, because imagination refused to let it fade. In every age, imagination takes what is fragile and gives it new form. It recycles despair into art, loneliness into poetry, silence into song. This is its quiet strength, the power to renew. Crescent moon imagination as refuge for those whose voices were silenced, women hidden behind convent walls, peasants without parchment, lovers separated by custom. Imagination was a place of freedom. They could not always act as they wished, but in the privacy of their thoughts, they lived whole other lives. This unseen resilience reminds us that imagination is not just play, it is survival. It gives people the courage to endure, because within imagination, the soul cannot be caged. Water wave a shared inheritance. What is most remarkable is how imagination connects us across time. The same stars that guided medieval sailors inspire us to dream today. The myths they whispered of creatures, of gods, of heroes, still live, reshaped in novels, films, bedtime stories. Imagination is not fragile. It is endlessly resilient. It survives in every retelling, every child's question, every quiet dream we carry into sleep. Threads of intimacy. In the tapestry of history, some threads shine brighter than others, not for their power or grandeur, but for their intimacy. These are the soft fibers that bind us together, across centuries and across silence. They remind us that beyond wars and ruins, it is closeness, the brush of a hand, the sharing of a glance, that endures. Candle quiet gestures. In medieval villages, intimacy was often found in the smallest of gestures. A shared loaf of bread between neighbors, a whispered story at the fireside, or the comfort of a hand resting on another's shoulder. These moments, though modest, carried the weight of survival. When storms raged outside and walls shook with the cold, it was not only hearth fires that warmed the night, but also these threads of intimacy woven quietly into daily life. Cherry blossom hidden loves. Not all intimacies were visible. In monasteries, where silence was expected, monks sometimes exchanged secret glances of friendship or scribbled kind notes in the margins of manuscripts. Women, bound by duties and roles, found intimacy in shared songs, in the braiding of hair, in soft laughter away from watchful eyes. These were lives where much was forbidden, yet tenderness always found a way to exist. Even hidden, intimacy stitched itself into human experience, refusing to be erased. Sparkles intimacy across distance. Sometimes intimacy lived in absence. Lovers separated by war or pilgrimage carried tokens, a ring, a ribbon, a pressed flower. These fragile objects became threads that stretched across time and space, keeping hearts tethered even when voices could not be heard. The resilience of intimacy was not measured in permanence, but in remembrance. To think of someone, to whisper their name in prayer, was to keep the thread unbroken. Crescent moon sacred intimacies. In temples and shrines, intimacy often took on sacred form. Pilgrims believed the gods listened to whispered wishes. Couples held hands beneath vaulted arches, sensing the divine in their togetherness. These moments wove intimacy not just between people, but between human beings and the mysteries they sought to understand. It was as if the universe itself leaned in, listening tenderly to the softest confessions of the heart. Water wave intimacy as resistance. In times of war, plague, or oppression, intimacy was also a form of defiance. To care for the sick when fear urged abandonment, to cradle a dying friend, to sing softly even in chains, these acts whispered, "We are still human. We still belong to one another." In this way, intimacy was not fragile at all, but unbreakable. It resisted despair and reminded people that, even in the darkest times, tenderness had power. Milky Way, a gentle closing. Now, as the night deepens, let yourself feel the threads of intimacy that connect you to. A remembered voice, a cherished face, a fleeting kindness from long ago. All of these live within you still. History shows us that intimacy does not vanish. It lingers like the scent of flowers pressed between pages, like the warmth of hands once held. These threads stretch across time, weaving the human story not with swords or crowns, but with tenderness. So rest tonight knowing that you are woven, too, into this tapestry of intimacy. The threads that bind you, love, friendship, memory, will not unravel. They will carry you softly, gently, into sleep. Crescent moon. And so, our journey drifts to a close. We have wandered through medieval myths, touched the walls of Pompeii, listened to letters written by long-ago hands, and heard the quiet songs of poets. Each story was like a candle, flickering, fragile, yet warm enough to guide us through the night. As you rest now, perhaps you feel how close those distant lives truly are. Their fears, their laughter, their longing for connection, all are threads in the same great tapestry, the one we are still weaving today. There's a certain peace in knowing that across centuries, people search for the same things we search for now. Safety, meaning, tenderness, belonging, though their myths sometimes wandered into shadows. At heart, they were ways of saying, we are here and our lives matter. And perhaps tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you can carry that comfort with you. The comfort that you are part of a story without end, a story that has always held love at its center. If this journey has brought you a sense of calm, of wonder, or simply a gentle pause from the day, then I invite you to keep traveling with me. There are more myths to explore, more hidden corners of history, where human hearts still whisper to us. In the next chapters, we will continue to open doors into forgotten worlds. Always softly, always with care, so that you may rest in their stories, as if they were lullabies. So, if you wish, stay close. Let your curiosity drift with us again, when the time is right. For now, let the echoes fade into stillness. Let the images settle like stars above a quiet sea. And as you close your eyes, remember, you are part of this great, timeless story. You belong within it, just as those before us belonged. Good night, and until our next journey together, sleep well. Crescent moon.